Jun Seok Yeo is a ball of potential ready to burst forth, but will it happen during the 23-24 season? We're going to discuss that on today's Locked On Zags podcast.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. And folks, right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Well, folks, we are continuing our player preview series today, spilling over into the start of the 23-24 college basketball season. Of course, Gonzaga does not get their season started until Friday, November 10th, when they take on the Yale Bulldogs at the McCarthy Athletic Center at 6 p.m. Going to be a fantastic start to the regular season for Gonzaga. But until we get there, we're going to continue talking about every player on Gonzaga's roster, their history, how they ended up here in Spokane. We'll discuss their best and their worst case scenarios for this upcoming season, and then close out the show talking about a more realistic role, minutes projection, expectations, and then take a look at their future. How many more years of eligibility do they have? Will they be an NBA player in due time, etc., etc. Today, we're talking Jun Seok Yeo. And Yeo is one of the most enigmatic players on this entire roster. And we've started to get a glimpse already through the preseason game, the exhibition game, the secret scrimmage at Baylor, kind of where he might fit into the rotation, right? Maybe I should say not fit into the rotation early in the season, but still want to give you a little bit of history of how we ended up here. Yeo is a 6'8", 215-pound forward from Seoul, South Korea. He is 21 years old. Is a huge part of the storyline for Yeo is that he is a non-traditional freshman starting his career here at Gonzaga. Yeo attended the NBA Global Academy in Australia. I suspect that's where Gonzaga kind of got a look at him. Of course, they had Alex Tui, who was going to be on this roster, but ended up deciding to play professionally in Australia. They've kind of recruited and checked out that Global Academy a handful of times. Yeo also went to Yongsan High School in South Korea and won a national title there while in high school with them. And then he arrived on campus. And that's how we found out that Jun Seok Yeo was a member of Gonzaga's basketball team, was last year after the semester break, after winter break, into the year 2023 in January. We just saw a picture of Yeo on the basketball floor wearing a Gonzaga uniform, warming up before a game, and it got passed around on social media, got tagged in a bunch of posts. Who's this? Who's this guy? You know, what's going on? And that was kind of how we started to do some digging to figure out, it looks like there's a new player on Gonzaga's roster. And of course, we end up ultimately finding out that it was Yeo. He joined the team last year at the semester break, was not eligible to play last year. So he effectively had a redshirt half freshman season on the bench last year. We saw him, we saw him on the bench. We saw him at games. We saw him warming up before games, but there was never any opportunity for him to actually end up on the floor for Gonzaga last year. But it certainly kind of prompted some excitement about him coming into the year. You look at Dusty Stromer, had a lot of excitement around him because he's been committed to Gonzaga for many years. Braden Huff, we knew, was going to be somebody who came off that red shirt after last year. And then, of course, the newcomers, Luka Krajinovic and Pavel Stosic, are so brand new to the roster that we barely had time to get excited about them. But Yeo was a guy that there was excitement about him for an entire calendar year, basically leading up to this moment where the season's about to begin, and he's finally going to get that opportunity to actually step out onto the floor. And part of the reason for that excitement is what he was able to do at the FIBA tournaments over the last couple of years. In 2021, at the FIBA U19 tournament, Yeo was unbelievable. He averaged 25.6 points per game, 10.6 rebounds per game, of course, for South Korea. He led the tournament in points, and he was second among all of the players in rebounds. A couple individual performances, 27 points, 13 rebounds against Argentina, 26 and 12 against Spain. He went up against Team USA and some center on that team named Chet Holmgren, and he dropped a cool 21 on him in that game. He also had 31 points against Puerto Rico and then 36 against Japan. A tremendous performance from Yeo during the FIBA U19 tournament back in 2021. Now, the rest of Yeo's team was not very good. He was relied upon significantly. His efficiency was not great because he was chucking up shots left and right. So there is a bit of a caveat with those numbers. Not that 25.5 points per game is in any way, shape, or form bad. It just comes with the understanding that he was relied upon more so than pretty much any individual player has ever been relied upon at Gonzaga, and just something you don't see very often just because his talent level was so far above the rest of the teammates on his team. It's not the only tournament that Yeo has performed well in. He was on Korea's senior national team back in 2021 as well. He helped them qualify for the FIBA Asia Cup by averaging 12.3 points and 4 boards in 3 games. This was a 19-year-old Jun Seok Yeo playing for the senior national team, averaging double figures. And then he was also with the team in the FIBA U18 Asian Championships, 16.2 points, 6 boards, 1.2 steals, and just under 2 blocks per game. He was on average 2 years younger than the competition. He was 16, playing in the U18 league and averaging 16 and 6. All this to say, Yeo is a dominant force in Korea. He was a basketball powerhouse, led his team to a national championship, dominated in the FIBA tournaments, and now he's in Spokane. And the excitement between January and October was through the roof for Jun Seok Yeo. And it has tempered a little bit only because it has become more clear now that we are just a few days away from the official actual start of the Gonzaga basketball season on Friday, that Yeo is probably not going to be a big part of the rotation. It does not mean things will not change. They always do. But right now, the expectation is that he's probably on the outside looking in. And we get that from a handful of results. He played 17 minutes at Craziness in the Kennel, 6.6 boards, 2 assists, and a block in that game. Didn't shoot it particularly well, 1 of 4 from the field, missed a pair of 3-pointers, but he did go 4 for 4 from the free throw line, which I always love guys who can knock down free throws, right? That's a big, important thing for Gonzaga. And then reportedly, from the scrimmage results that we got from the Baylor game, it looks like Yeo played just 5 minutes against Baylor, and he had a steal and took 1 shot, and that was it. So we really didn't see him much at all in that Baylor game. There was reportedly a second scrimmage that took place between Gonzaga and Baylor's kind of backups that didn't involve as many of the starters. Perhaps he played more in that, although that is all alleged at this point. And then against Lewis Clark State, probably the most prominent example we have of what his role might look like this year. Yeo played 12 minutes in that game. Most of them came at the end of the second half. He came in late and pretty much played the rest of the game, but that was really all we saw from him. He did not score. He had a rebound and a steal. He took 4 shot attempts. One of them was a 3-pointer that hit nothing but nothing. And that was it. That was what we saw from Yeo in that game. 12 minutes there, 5 minutes against Baylor, 17 minutes in Craziness. Only scored in that Craziness scrimmage, has not scored in any of the other contests. So what does that mean? What does that mean for Yeo's role? And what does it mean for the fact that we know this young man oozes potential? We can see it. We've seen it in the past. How much of that are we going to see in this first season in Spokane? We're going to discuss what we believe are his best and his worst case scenarios after a word from today's sponsor, Prize Picks. Folks, Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big, huge payouts like their Taco Tuesday deals. Every single Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide you with even more value. And with Prize Picks' reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for NFL games and college football top 25 matchups, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and they do not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. This is unprecedented in the daily fantasy sports space. No other platform gives you insurance policies against injuries the way that Prize Picks does. Beyond that, folks, Prize Picks is just really easy to use. All you have to do is you pick 2 players or more, and you choose more or less with whatever stat they provide for you. So a great example here on Wednesday, if you guys are on the Prize Picks app, they got Zach Collins for the San Antonio Spurs, 25.5. That's combined points, rebounds, assists. If you believe Zach Collins is going to get more than 26 points, rebounds, and assists combined, you hit the more button, you're right, you get paid. That's simple, folks. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use that promo code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use the promo code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, continuing our season preview series here, discussing our player preview series, discussing Jun Seok Yeo. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Give a special shout out to those everyday listeners who are with us all off season long, who are here getting hyped for the start of the Gonzaga basketball season, which will begin on Friday. We got a preview of Yale, what that team looks like, what we're looking for in that contest. That'll be Thursday's show. And then Friday, we're going to wrap up our player preview episodes as well. All coming up here on Locked On Zags. Again, hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. But for now, I want to do our best and worst case scenarios for Jun Seok Yeo, a player that I've been really looking forward to getting the opportunity to talk about in this capacity. And for those of you who have listened to these, you know that this caveat is coming because we've done it for every other one of these that we have done so far. That is best case within reason and worst case without injury. If a player's best case scenario is that they win National Player of the Year, that they are the first overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft, that they lead Gonzaga to a championship, if that's realistic, we're going to talk about it. For most players, it is not. So we're going to keep this within reason of each player's kind of individual best and worst case scenarios. And then on the worst case, we're not going to talk about injuries. Every player's worst case scenario is they get hurt and they miss the season. We're going to try to keep our conversations to within the realm of what might actually happen on the basketball court. When injuries are a relevant part of a player's past, we'll talk about it in that situation. So for Yeo, best and worst case scenarios, knowing what we know now about his perceived role coming into the season, really the best case scenario for Yeo is a huge year of growth and development. And a lot of that is going to happen behind the scenes. We're probably not going to know if the 23-24 season was a quote-unquote best case scenario for Jun Seok Yeo until a couple years from now. It's similar to how the second year for Rui, in particular, Rui Hachimura, where he was playing limited role off the bench. He kind of was running around like crazy, tons of energy, tons of athleticism, all of it was on display, but he didn't really fit into the offense. And you could kind of tell that he was still learning the ropes of this offense, this team, this system. That was the best case scenario, because what happened after that is Rui became an All-American, became a top 10 pick in the NBA draft, is a well-known brand in the NBA. That means that his year of development probably couldn't have gone much better, but we didn't know that at the time. And that may be the case here with Yeo, where he is developing behind the scenes. And we're just not necessarily going to know how much of that growth is happening. Again, another good comparison is Braden Huff last year. Players who redshirt at Gonzaga tend to do really well coming out of that, but you don't always know that it's going to happen. It sure looks like it's going to happen with Huff. And again, we use the Rui comparison with Jun Seok Yeo, but it's not just him. Shemek Karnowski was pretty rough as a freshman, got excellent by the time he was a senior. Joel Ayayi didn't play at all. And then 2 years later, he was coming out of Gonzaga and going into the NBA. So this happens. Zach Norvell, another great example, a guy who redshirted early in his career and then had a phenomenal 2 years in Spokane. So this is not an uncommon path. And the best case scenario for Yeo is basically that it goes the same way. The best case scenario for Yeo in terms of actual production on the court this year is that he plays himself into a bigger role as the year goes on. We'll talk about this more in the third and final segment of the show, but I think right now he's 10. 10 out of 10, basically, in terms of players who are going to play legitimate minutes this season. But in the best case scenario, by the end of the year, this is the best case scenario for Yeo specifically, is that by the end of the year, he's maybe seventh, eighth, somewhere in there. He is demonstrating enough on the court, and that growth and development that we feel like we need to see from him is happening at an accelerated pace. And by the end of the year, he's valuable enough to play legitimate minutes, not just in blowouts, not just in the second half of the second half, but he's actually playing regular minutes for Gonzaga. How that happens in a best case scenario for Yeo is that size and that scoring ability show up. what we saw from him, he's not going to go average 25 and 10, but the ability to score in multiple different ways, to shoot from beyond the arc, to get to his spots in the mid-range, to put the ball on the deck, the ball handling skills, all of that stuff that we saw in highlight packages of him in the FIBA tournament is there, and that he starts to unlock it as the year goes on. That he adjusts to the speed of Division I college basketball, that he adjusts to the speed of Gonzaga's specific offense, that he knows his role, that he finds his spots on the floor, that he knows when to shoot, when to pass, when to be a playmaker. He knows where to go defensively. That was a big issue for many of Gonzaga's players who took a couple of years to kind of fully find themselves in the system was issues on the defensive end of the floor. The best case scenario for Yeo, you see that development right away. He's not going to be an elite defender on day one. I just don't think that that's a reality for him. But in the best case scenario, again, not only is that development happening behind the scenes, but we're actually we're able to see it. We can see him improve. His processing speeds up. His decision-making on both ends of the floor speeds up. And you start to see him making better decisions, getting more comfortable, not looking as lost with the basketball or on the floor trying to find his spots. You don't have teammates grabbing his jersey and pulling him to be in a different spot. Best case scenario is maybe that stuff does happen, but it starts to happen less. And you can clearly tell that the game is getting easier for him. The speed, the processing, the decision-making, all of that stuff is improving as the year goes on. The best case scenario for Jun Seok Yeo is that the outside shooting, the overall scoring is there. Again, because his role will be limited, I don't know what we'll be seeing from an efficiency perspective. But again, this is more of an eye test and not a numbers thing. Does he take better shots? If Yeo takes crazy shots early in the year and makes them, and then later in the year he's taking better shots, he's taking shots within the fit of the offense, and he's not knocking him down, that's okay. Like, that's more what I'd want to see. So I think that, again, the numbers here, because the role is going to be so small, probably aren't necessarily going to tell the full picture. It's more of just kind of eye test. What does he look fit-wise, comfort-wise, all that stuff. The best case scenario for Yeo is at the end of the year, people are geeked about what he's going to be in 2024-25. The hype train is through the flipping roof when we get into next summer, and people are so excited about what's Yeo going to be in his next year. Is he going to start right away at the 4? Is he going to replace Watson? Is he going to start at the 3? And we're excited about it. What are the worst case scenarios for Jun Seok Yeo? Well, again, a lot of it is maybe stuff we won't see. It's that the development behind the scenes is not happening at the rate that Mark Few expected, that Yeo expected, that the rest of the development staff expected. That maybe he is just not processing the game at this level the way that there was hope that he would. And I don't know if we would ever necessarily see that. I think there have been players, international players, who have come to Gonzaga with fairly high expectations who never cracked the rotation, in part because presumably the things that the staff expected or hoped would happen to them behind the scenes just never did. And in the worst case scenario for Yeo, that is the case. And again, we won't know all that at the end of this year. The worst case scenario in terms of things we might see this year are that growth in terms of his comfort on the floor, his decision-making with the basketball, his understanding of his role and where to be, doesn't really happen. Either because he's not playing enough, or just because he needs more time. So, a game in November against Jackson State or whomever, where he gets to play 8 minutes and you see, oh, wow, he took some good shots, but he also was kind of out of position a lot and looked lost defensively. The worst case scenario is that when he plays against Pacific or San Diego in late February, that he looks the same, that there hasn't been that obvious growth. And again, that's probably not a horrible scenario. Expecting obvious visible growth from a player from November to February when they're playing 6 to 7 minutes a night is probably a little unfeasible. But in the worst case scenario, we clearly wouldn't see it. And what it would lead to is concern at the end of the year about what his role looks like going forward. I still think there will be hype. And I still think there probably should be hype outside of him just looking absolutely horrendous this year, which seems very unlikely. I don't think he'll even play enough for that to be a reality. I think there will still be hype. But in a worst case scenario, it's tempered a little bit. Instead of constantly talking about Rui and Joel Ayayi and Zach Norvell, conversation is more about Martinez Arlauskas. And I hate to drag him into this because I love Martinez Arlauskas and he was a tremendously positive presence for Gonzaga. But when you talk about players who never took that next step, he is kind of who comes to mind. And in a worst case scenario for Yeo is that he doesn't take those steps. And again, we're not going to have the answer to whether Yeo is Rui or Martinez if we're talking about the kind of widest range of outcomes here. We're not going to have that answer at the end of this year. But in the worst case scenario is that there's fear that he's trending the other direction, that he didn't show enough defensively, offensively, role-wise, comfortability-wise to make us feel confident that he is going to take that step in the 2024-25 season. And folks, that's what I want to talk about to close out the show. What does Yeo's actual role look like this year? And what do we expect his role to look like next year or the year after that? What is the future for Jun Seok Yeo, and could it lead him to being in the NBA? We're going to talk about all that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, score early and often this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is crazy easy to use. There's a huge range of betting options. You can bet on spreads. You can bet on player props, over-unders, and more. And right now, the Zags have 800-1 odds to make the Final Four. And folks, the lines have not come out as I'm recording, but there will be lines on that Yale game as well in case you want to toss some money down on Gonzaga to cover the spread there against the other Bulldogs out of the Ivy League. So folks, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon now and kick off the college basketball season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, closing out today's show. Continuing our player preview, one of our very last preview episodes. We got one more on Pavel Stosic on Friday. We also will maybe do one on the walk-ons, depending. I always kind of like giving a chance to shout out every player on the roster. So if we get a chance next week, we'll talk about the walk-ons and what their season might look like as well. But right now we are finishing up talking about 21-year-old South Korean star Jun Seok Yeo and what his role might look like here in the 23-24 season. So for those of you who listened to Mailbag Monday episode, or for those of you who have read the blog, scorezagscore.com, check it out. If you have not done so yet, literally scorezagscore.com, super easy, tons of written content on there right now. You know that I have Yeo as my 10th man in the rotation. Starting five, I have consistent as what we've seen from Gonzaga so far: Nembhard, Hickman, Venters, Ike, and Watson. Ben Gregg, Dusty Stromer are 6 and 7. Braden Huff has played his way into being that 8th man in my mind. I think we're going to see Gonzaga go with 4 bigs in their regular rotation. I have Luka Krajinovic at number 9, and then Yeo comes in at number 10. And again, that's consistent with how the minutes shook out in the Lewis Clark State exhibition game, and that's consistent with how the minutes shook out in the Baylor game as well. Krajinovic did not play in the actual Baylor scrimmage, according to the report that we got on that one, so a little different there, but I think it certainly appears like Yeo is kind of on the outside of the regular rotation. So for me, I expect him to play minutes similar to young players in Gonzaga's past who have been just outside Mark Few's 8, and frankly, let's be honest, sometimes 7-man rotation. What that means is that Yeo will play 6 to 8 minutes per game. At the end of the year, when you look at the basketball reference page, it'll show Jun Seok Yeo 6.5 minutes per game, 7.2 minutes per game, whatever it is. But that is a bit misleading because he won't play in a lot of games. I don't think Yeo will play against Purdue or UConn or maybe even San Diego State. Yeah, it depends on how those games go. For all I know, Gonzaga will blow the doors off any of those 3 teams, or knock on wood, they will get the doors blown off of them in one of those games, and some garbage time might come Yeo's way. But for the most part, I expect Yeo to play 25 games for Gonzaga this year, 10 or so where he won't play because Gonzaga will just really tighten up that rotation and only play 7 or maybe 8. And then he'll play, most of those games he'll play enough to get 5, 6, 7 minutes of action. He'll come in at the under 8 media timeout and play the rest of the game because Gonzaga's up 27 points on the road against Portland, and they don't need to keep playing Ike or Watson or Venters or whomever, so they're playing Yeo. I think we'll see that. I think we'll see 8 to 10-ish minutes in the SWAC games and some of the bad WCC games, and we won't see him at all against some of the other better teams. In terms of what we're going to see from him on the floor, we're going to see some really fun stuff. We're going to see him get out in transition and dunk on people. We're going to see him take some difficult shots and make them. We're going to see his athleticism translate into fun plays on the defensive end. We're also going to see a player who turns the ball over more than you would expect from a guy who's only playing as many minutes as he is. We're going to see him miss a lot of shots. We're going to see him airball shots like he did against Lewis Clark State in the exhibition game, airball to 3. We're going to see all of that. That's okay. That's okay. Because he's getting experience. He's getting to play at that speed against an opponent. It is forever different playing against your teammates in practice than it is in a real game. Yeo getting those opportunities, however infrequently they are, however quote unquote bad they look on the floor in terms of, missed shots, bad turnovers, whatever it may be. That is experience that he gets to take with him into next season. Overall stats, 2.5, 3 points per game, 1.5 boards, not very good efficiency. That's kind of what I'll leave you with as the statistical prediction, not because I'm down on Yeo by any stretch of the imagination, but just because I think that's probably what that role will lead to him getting to produce on a semi-nightly basis. But what it leads to is the future. And that's the exciting part about Jun Seok Yeo. He's not young. And that's an important part of this conversation. He's 21. So next year is his second full season of college basketball, his quote-unquote sophomore year. It's technically his junior year, but he'll be 22. He'll be the age of Drew Timme last year when everybody in college basketball was calling Drew Timme an old man because they didn't realize that he was actually only at Gonzaga for 4 years. So his age is an advantage. It's a disadvantage in terms of being perceived as an NBA talent because teams love youth and they love upside, and they won't see as much of that with Yeo, especially if he stays all 3 years in Spokane. But it is an advantage in terms of his ability to be ready to play college basketball. He's still got learning to do, and that's kind of what I'm expecting is this year's a lot of growth, a lot of development, a lot of it happening behind the scenes, some of it happening before our eyes on the court. But next year, when Gonzaga doesn't have Anton Watson, Yeo could step into a role as a 4. Probably not all the way into the starting lineup. Maybe Ben Gregg and Braden Huff are going to have something to say about that, and they probably should. But maybe Yeo's the 6th man next year, or even 7th man. I wouldn't be surprised to see that at all. In fact, that's what I expect, is for him to take on a bigger role next year. 11, 12, 15, heck, maybe 18 minutes a game. Who knows? It's hard to predict. The offseason could go haywire. Stromer could be gone. Venters could leave. Hickman. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I'm not projecting any of that, mind you. I'm just saying you don't know in the modern college basketball. But I expect Yeo to take a bigger role next year. And I think maybe by the time he's in his senior year, which is that 25, 26 season, he could explode. And he'd be old. He'd be 23, 24. But he would be ready. And I think there's a chance that Jun Seok Yeo is an incredible Gonzaga basketball player. Maybe next year we just see glimpses, more glimpses than we see this year. But 2 years from now, I think we could be looking at a legitimate Gonzaga basketball star. And in terms of the NBA, again, the age is going to be a problem. If he blows up in 25, 26, he's still going to get attention. He's still going to get looks. Rui's still got looks, and he was a junior coming out of college. So I do think that he's 6'8". If he can stretch the floor, if he looks competent defensively, he's going to get looks. Wings are so valuable. His ability to shoot is going to be a huge part of it. But even Rui wasn't a great three-point shooter coming out of college, so it doesn't always matter. I'm excited to see what happens with Jun Seok Yeo. This isn't going to be the year. But next year might be. And if not next year, the year after that almost certainly is going to be. We're going to see some fun glimpses from Yeo this year. Maybe not every night, probably not every night, but occasionally. And I think watching those and remembering, hey, I remember when we saw Yeo do that as a sophomore. Because as a senior, he's going to be doing a whole lot of that as well. That's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners. Shout out to those of you on the Discord channel as well. If you want to get involved in the Discord channel, there's a link in the show notes. Click the link. It will take you in. You get a rule channel. You click from there. You accept the rules, and boom, you are in talking Zags 24/7 with over 200 of us right now as we get into the season. Again, thank you so much for listening. We got a preview of Yale coming up on Thursday's show, and then closing out the week with our final player preview, all right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Once again, thank you folks for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.